The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the desert skyline of Al-Zahir, a glimmering city of steel and sand. From the 72nd floor of a sleek glass tower, Zayan Malik stood in silence. A half-empty glass of scotch rested in his hand, untouched for hours. At 52, he was the pinnacle of power in the oil and finance world, respected, feared, and envied across the Middle East. To the outside world, he was the image of success. But tonight, Zayan couldn't shake the ache rooted deep in his chest. It was a memory, one that refused to stay buried. 7 years ago, long before he commanded global attention, Zayan was still climbing his way up the brutal corporate ladder. It was during this climb that he crossed an unthinkable line. Back then, his estate was staffed with workers from different corners of the world, and among them was a young woman named Lyanna, an African migrant from a rural village in Mali. Lyanna was unlike anyone Zayan had ever met. Quiet, modest, and hardworking. Her dignity wasn't loud, but it showed in the way she moved with grace and pride, even as she scrubbed floors. She had come to Al-Zahir with dreams of sending money back to her family, like so many others, in her situation. And for some reason, her presence lingered in Zayan's thoughts long after she left a room. One night, the unthinkable happened. What started as a casual exchange spiraled into something dangerous. He invited her into his private study under the pretense of reviewing work, and before long, temptation won. That night blurred the lines between power and conscience. Weeks later, Lyanna stood before him trembling, her eyes red, her scarf clutched tight across her chest. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, barely audible. Zayan's entire world turned to ice. "What?" He barked, his voice low and venomous. "That's impossible." "I didn't mean for this to happen," Lyanna said, her voice breaking. "I need help. I don't have anyone else." But Zayan didn't see a woman in need. He saw a scandal waiting to erupt. His name, his empire, his image. All of it could come crashing down if word got out that he had fathered a child out of wedlock, with a maid. His reaction was swift, cold, final. That same day, Lyanna was dismissed without warning. A severance envelope was placed in her hands. A one-way ticket to Mali was booked. No explanation, no apology, no trace left behind. And just like that, Zayan erased her from his life. He had convinced himself she would survive. Maybe she had lied about the pregnancy. Maybe she had found someone else to help her. Either way, it was easier not to know. It was easier to believe she no longer existed, that his actions had no consequence. Years passed. His empire grew. His name graced international boards and high-profile summits. He moved in circles of royals, billionaires, and world leaders. And the past? It remained locked away until that one day in London when the past came back to life. 5 years had passed since Zayan Malik last thought of Lyanna, or so he told himself. In truth, her face surfaced in his dreams often, quiet, determined, unforgettable. But in the world of billion-dollar deals and political alliances, regrets had no place. He buried her memory beneath layers of business. That illusion shattered in an instant. It happened in London during an elite investment summit hosted in the heart of Canary District. Zayan was there to finalize a strategic partnership with a booming African tech startup that had captured the attention of the global finance community. He walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room of the Aurora Tower, expecting little more than graphs, forecasts, and the usual pleasantries. He was mentally preparing to meet the CEO when a deep, confident voice spoke just behind the man. "Good afternoon, Mr. Malik. My name is Ezra Cater. I'll be assisting on behalf of our executive team." Zayan froze. Cater. His ears rang. The name hit him like a tidal wave. He looked up, eyes searching. The young man standing before him was in his early 20s, dark-skinned, elegant posture, tailored navy blue suit. But it was the face. Angular cheekbones. That calm, assertive stare. Those eyes, piercing and focused, so familiar they sent a tremor through Zayan's soul. The room blurred. No one else noticed. The meeting continued. Slides, changing, voices discussing market penetration and logistics. But Zayan couldn't hear a word. He was spiraling. That name, that face, that poise. It was like staring into a mirror 2 decades younger. Impossible. Lyanna had vanished. She was gone. She had accepted the money. She had left. Even if she had kept the baby. What were the chances? Yet Zayan couldn't look away from Ezra. The young man was composed and professional, his every word sharp, his handshake confident. He addressed the room with intelligence and clarity. There was something eerily familiar in his rhythm, his quiet authority, his instinct to hold his ground, traits that Zayan recognized all too well. When the meeting concluded and everyone stood to leave, Zayan's body moved before his mind. Could stop it. Ezra, he called, voice more stable than his trembling insides. A moment, if I may. The young man turned, respectful but cautious. Yes, Mr. Malik. Zayan hesitated. His throat tightened. Your surname, Cater. Are you from West Africa? Ezra nodded slightly. Yes. My mother was from a town near Makona. And your father? Zayan asked, careful. There was a pause. A flicker passed through Ezra's expression. Pain, anger, something hidden. He straightened his shoulders. I never met him. Zayan felt as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Those 4 words struck harder than any business loss or public scandal ever could. I never met him. Before Zayan could say anything else, another executive stepped in, clapping Ezra on the back and pulling him into another conversation. Ezra turned away, completely unaware of the emotional bomb he had just dropped on the man behind him. That night, back in his suite high above the glowing city, Zayan sat motionless. His whiskey remained untouched. The skyline of London glittered outside, but he couldn't see it. He heard only Lyanna's trembling voice. He saw her tear-streaked face. He remembered the envelope he had handed her, and the door he had closed, behind her. She hadn't vanished. She had given him a son, and that son now stood before him, strong, brilliant, self-made, and completely unaware of who he truly was. Zayan rose, his reflection staring back from the window. He picked up his phone and dialed a private contact. I need someone found, he said, voice rough with guilt. Her name was Lyanna Kader. She worked for me in Al-Zahir 7 years ago. There was a brief pause on the line. Understood, sir, the investigator replied. Zayan ended the call and stood there for a long time, staring into the night, his hands trembling. For the first time in his life, he felt afraid. The days that followed moved slowly, haunted by shadows Zayan Malik had spent years pretending didn't exist. His London meetings concluded, but his mind stayed miles away, in the dusty corridors of memory and the quiet strength in Ezra's voice. He had ordered the investigation as soon as he'd returned to his suite, but the waiting was unbearable. Then, one evening, a package arrived at his hotel. It was discreet, marked only with a private security seal. Inside was a folder, neatly clipped pages, photos, a letter, and at the very bottom, a DNA test. Zayan didn't breathe as he opened it. The words confirmed what he already knew in his bones. Ezra Cater was his biological son. His heart sank. Underneath the medical documents was a separate envelope, aged, creased hand addressed in Lyanna's delicate handwriting. He opened it slowly. The letter inside was dated 3 years earlier. Lyanna's words were simple, gentle, and heartbreakingly human. She had never expected him to reach out, she wrote. But if by some miracle he ever did, she wanted him to know that Ezra existed, not for money, not for forgiveness, but because he had a right to know. She wrote about their son, the milestones he had reached, the questions he had asked about his father, and the dreams she had for him. She didn't beg, didn't blame, didn't plead, only told the truth with dignity. Zayan's hands trembled as he placed the letter down. For decades he had built his name into a fortress, a global empire of oil, tech, and steel. He had conquered competition, tamed economies, and silenced critics. But this letter, shattered all of that in a heartbeat. He had dismissed her like a problem to be solved, and now the life he denied had returned, not in revenge but in quiet strength. He couldn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring into nothing. Regret gripped his chest like a vice. He didn't weep, Zayan Malik. Didn't cry, but his eyes were heavy, and his soul unraveled. In the early morning light, he picked up his phone once more and typed a message to the one person he wasn't sure would ever respond. Ezra, if you're willing, I'd like to speak. Not as a businessman, not as a partner, but as something I've never had the courage to be, your father. He stared at the screen before hitting send. No answer came. Not that day. Not the next. He waited in silence. Finally, 3 days later, a single reply appeared. I'll be at the Masari Hotel Lounge tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late. Zayan stared at the message, heart pounding. There was no warmth in it, no forgiveness, just a door, barely open, but a door nonetheless. Zayan arrived at the Masari Hotel 15 minutes early, an unusual occurrence for a man known for making others wait. He wore no designer suit this time, just a simple tailored blazer and slacks. His assistant had asked if he wanted press clearance or security. He declined both. This meeting was not for headlines. The lounge was quiet, elegant. Soft music hummed through the background. Zayan sat at a table tucked into a corner near a tall window. Outside, the city of London stirred to life. Inside, his world was about to change. At precisely 9 a.m., Ezra walked in. He wore a sharp gray suit, a leather laptop case slung over one shoulder, and an expression carved in stone, calm, focused, unreadable. Zayan stood up, unsure whether to offer a hand or not. Ezra nodded politely, took the seat across from him, and opened with no pleasantries. I read the letters, he said flatly. Zayan lowered himself slowly into his seat. I figured you had. Ezra's fingers tapped lightly against the table once, then stopped. His voice was steady, but his eyes were a storm. You know what hurt the most? He asked. Zayan's heart thudded. He didn't answer. It wasn't that you rejected my mother, or even that you sent her away. It was that you never once tried to find me. Not once. The words cut through him sharper than any deal gone bad or investor lawsuit. Shame gripped him. I told myself you might not exist, Zayan said slowly, his voice raw. It was cowardice. I convinced myself if I didn't look, then I hadn't done anything wrong. If I pretended long enough, it would disappear. Ezra shook his head, exhaling through his nose. And yet here we are. A pause settled between them. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't gentle either. It was a silence heavy with unresolved history, a space neither of them knew how to fill. I want to know more about her, Zayan said suddenly. About your mother, about Lyanna. After I sent her away. Ezra's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Not softer, but less guarded. She didn't have much, he said. We lived outside Makona, in a small rented house with peeling paint and a tin roof. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning rooms at a hotel and doing laundry overnight for a factory. Even when she was sick, she never stopped moving. Zayan's throat tightened. She spoke 6 languages, Ezra continued. Did you know that? She taught me to read from old history books when I was 5. Even when her body was too tired to sit up, she made me read to her. She smiled with her eyes even when she was too weak to stand. I didn't know, Zayan whispered. Of course you didn't, Ezra said sharply. Then he looked away, biting back the anger. His jaw clenched, but when he looked back, his voice was calmer. But I want you to know it now, because she was extraordinary, and you threw her away like she was nothing. Zayan bowed his head. I didn't deserve her, he said quietly. And I don't deserve you either. Ezra studied him, long and hard. Then why are you here? Zion swallowed. Because I don't want to make the same mistake twice. I can't undo what I did to her or to you. But if there's any way at all, I can be part of your life now. I want to try. Ezra leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. This isn't a movie, Zion. There's no dramatic scene, no neat ending, no instant forgiveness. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Zion said. I'm asking for a chance to earn something. Maybe not love, but maybe trust, or even just understanding. Ezra didn't respond, but he didn't get up either. For Zion, that was enough. A start. The days that followed their first meeting were not easy. Ezra didn't return messages immediately. He didn't offer another invitation or suggest meeting. Again. But Zion Malik didn't disappear either. He kept showing up, quietly, carefully, trying not to intrude. One afternoon, Zion walked into a community center tucked between office blocks near Camden. There, a small bronze plaque read, "The Lyanna Foundation, Empowering Voices of African Women." He stepped inside. The building wasn't grand, but it pulsed with energy. Volunteers moved through the halls. Women gathered in small rooms for literacy, sessions, and business workshops. Photos of Lyanna hung on the walls, smiling, working, teaching. In every image, her eyes were alive. Zion stood in silence, absorbing each one. Later, he learned that Ezra had built the foundation in his mother's name, brick by brick. No sponsorships, no PR stunts, just quiet determination. It was a living legacy of the woman he had once cast aside. That evening, they saw each other again. It was after a women's safety seminar Ezra had helped organize. Zion hadn't been invited, but he sat at the back, silent, never speaking. When the crowd left, Ezra found him folding up chairs. "You don't have to do that," Ezra said, surprised. "I know," Zion replied, setting another chair against the wall. "But maybe I should." Ezra watched him for a moment, unsure what to say. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't closure. But it was something. A beginning. Later that night, Zion returned to his hotel. Just before midnight, his phone vibrated. A message. "There's a memorial for my mother next Friday in Al-Zahir. I'll be speaking. You can come, if you want." Zion stared at the screen for a long time, then typed one word. "Yes." As the day of the memorial approached, whispers began to swirl through the media. A mysterious link between Zion Malik and the rising young African tech executive had surfaced. Tabloids speculated wildly. Some published side-by-side photos. Zion's strong jaw next to Ezra's steely gaze, stirring gossip and theories. Zion ignored all of it. He didn't care about press or perception. The only thing that mattered now was Ezra and Lyanna. The day of the memorial arrived with a golden stillness in the air. The sun lit the desert skyline of Al-Zahir as though in reverence. The ceremony was held in the central hall of the Lyanna Foundation's headquarters, a structure built in her memory. It was graceful, not grand. White curtains framed tall glass windows. Floral arrangements lined the aisles. And at the front, beneath a soft spotlight, stood a towering black and white portrait of Lyanna. Below it, a plaque read, "Lyanna Cater, Mother, Fighter, Light to the Forgotten." Zion entered alone. No bodyguards, no luxury suit, just a dark gray thobe and a face etched with humility. People turned, murmured. Some recognized him. Some stared. But he didn't look back. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to listen, to remember, to grieve. And then, Ezra walked onto the stage. Dressed in a charcoal suit, he stood behind the podium and scanned the hall. His eyes were heavy, but clear. "Mother was the strongest person I've ever known," he began, voice unwavering. "She was born into struggle, but she never gave up. She worked long nights, gave everything she had to raise me alone, and never asked for pity, Only dignity. Zayan's throat burned. She never spoke often about my father, Ezra continued. But she did speak about forgiveness. She believed people could change, not through words, but through action, through sacrifice, through showing up when it matters. He paused, then added, I'm here today not just because of her, but because of what she gave to others. This foundation exists so no woman ever feels alone, so no mother has to fight. In silence, applause rose gently from the crowd. When it faded, Ezra stepped off the stage. He didn't return to his seat. Instead, he walked to the back of the hall, where Zayan sat in silence. He stopped beside him. She would have wanted. You here? Ezra said softly, not meeting his eyes. Zayan nodded, voice low. And I wanted to be. They left the ceremony side by side. Outside, sunlight bathed the courtyard garden, a garden Lyanna had helped design before her passing. It was a quiet space, filled with native flowers, and a single stone bench beneath a tall palm. Ezra led the way. They sat together. She used to sit here, Ezra said, his voice quieter now, with women who were too afraid to speak. She'd let them cry, let them be heard, let them feel seen. Zayan looked around slowly, his heart aching. She was extraordinary, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. She was. Ezra agreed. Then he added, voice dropping, I hated you for a long time. Not just for what you did to her, but because you didn't even try. I wondered if I wasn't worth your time, or if I reminded you too much of what you'd done. Zayan said nothing. He let the words land. But Ezra continued. These last few weeks, I've seen someone different from the man she told me about. I've seen someone who's trying. Zayan turned to him slowly. It's all I can do now. I will never undo what I did. But I'm here, and I'll stay, as long as you'll let me. Ezra studied him in silence. Then, from the inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a small envelope, weathered, unopened. My mother wrote this before she died, Ezra said. I've read it a dozen times, but I think it was meant for you. Zayan took the letter with shaking hands. Inside, his past, and maybe his future, waited. The envelope weighed more, in Zayan's hand, than he could have imagined. It wasn't just paper. It was the voice of a woman he had abandoned, yet who, in her final days, still believed in something greater than anger. But he didn't read it right away. Instead, he carried it with him for days. Tucked safely in his coat, it became a silent reminder of everything he had destroyed, and everything he might still be able to build. He didn't push Ezra after the memorial, didn't call, didn't send messages. He showed up. One morning, Ezra was speaking at a panel on women's rights in North Africa. The event was held in a modest auditorium, attended by educators, activists, and survivors. Zayan sat quietly in the back row, a world away from the spotlight he usually commanded. When the audience applauded, he didn't move. When the cameras scanned the crowd, he made sure not to be seen. He wasn't there for attention. He was there to listen, to learn, to be present. That afternoon, Ezra saw him again, this time, helping volunteers pack hygiene kits at the Foundation's downtown office. No press, no assistants, just Zayan rolling up his sleeves, taping up boxes. You really don't have to do that, Ezra said, pausing beside him. I know, Zayan replied, but maybe I need to. Ezra didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. Over the next few days, it became a pattern. Zayan sat through meetings, not speaking unless spoken to. He observed as Ezra led with calm authority, his team admiring, him not for his name but for his work. Zayan visited shelters, spoke to women who had survived violence and exploitation. He didn't offer money. He offered something far more rare in men like him: presence. There was discomfort. He didn't know what to say half the time. But he stayed. One evening, after a long fundraising event, Ezra caught him stacking empty chairs in the corner of the hall. "You always do this?" Ezra asked, watching him. "No," Zayan said, sweat on his brow. "But maybe I should have started years ago." Ezra paused, then helped him stack the next chair. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something, a beginning. Later that night, Zayan finally opened the letter. Sitting alone in his apartment in Al-Zahir, he unfolded Lyanna's final words. "Zayan, if you're reading this, it means something unexpected has happened. I don't write to blame you. I write so you will understand. You hurt me, deeply. But I also saw in you the man you could have been, the man who once held my hand beneath the stars and spoke of dreams he never dared chase. Our son is extraordinary. He is strength and grace and fire. He is the best parts of you and the best of me. I raised him to be kind, to be whole, to be unbreakable. But I always hoped that somewhere in your soul there would be a place for him. If you have found that space, don't waste it." Lyanna Zayan's eyes stung. His throat closed. She had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. The next morning he sent a message to Ezra. "Thank you for the chance, not for me, for her." Ezra's reply was short. "If you mean it, keep showing up." The week passed slowly, heavy with anticipation and something Zayan Malik hadn't felt in decades: vulnerability. The upcoming memorial for Lyanna wasn't just a ceremony, it was a reckoning, a public moment to face the life he had walked away from. But this time he wouldn't be watching from afar. He would stand in it. Friday morning arrived with a golden haze over Al-Zahir. The desert wind was still, the air thick with quiet reverence. People from across the region gathered at the central hall of the Lyanna Foundation for Women's Empowerment, the very building she had dreamed of and Ezra had made real. Zayan walked in alone. No entourage, no photographers, no designer brands, or polished entourage. Just a modest, dark gray thobe and a heart full of things he couldn't name. Inside, the space was graceful and warm. White curtains fluttered gently beside towering windows. Along the walls were portraits of Lyanna, teaching young girls beneath trees in Mali, holding Ezra's hand as a child, standing proud in her hotel uniform, her gaze firm and full of dignity, and at the front of the room stood a large black and white photo of her, strong and serene. Below it, etched into a bronze plaque, were the words, "Lyanna Kader, Mother, Fighter, Light to the Forgotten." The seats quickly filled. Philanthropists, educators, activists, and many of the women the foundation had helped over the years. Some whispered when they saw Zayan enter. Some stared longer, but no one approached him, and he welcomed the silence. He took a seat near the back. This moment wasn't his. Then Ezra stepped onto the stage. He wore a classic black suit, his face calm but layered with emotion. When he spoke, the room fell into a still, reverent hush. "My mother was the strongest person I've ever known," he began. "She was born into hardship, raised in struggle, but she never let those things define her. She worked long nights, raised me on her own, and never once asked for pity. She only asked for dignity." Zayan's eyes burned. He blinked, quickly. "She never told me much about my father," Ezra continued. "But she spoke of something more powerful than pain. Forgiveness. She believed people could change, not with apologies, but with action, with sacrifice, with effort." A long pause. The room breathed with him. She built her life with broken tools and gave light to women who had none. And today we carry her work forward, not just because of what she did for me, but because of what she did for all of us. The applause was gentle, long, emotional. Ezra stepped off the stage and, without ceremony, walked to the back of the room. He stopped beside Zayan, not looking at him directly. "She would have wanted you here," Ezra said quietly. Zayan nodded. "And I needed to be." They stepped outside together into the garden behind the foundation building, a sanctuary Lyanna had helped design. The path curved through native flowers, around a small stone fountain, and ended at a quiet bench shaded by a tall date palm. She used to sit right here, Ezra said as they reached the bench. With women who were too afraid to speak, she'd just listen. Let them cry, let them feel heard. Zion sat beside him. She was extraordinary, he said almost to himself. She was, Ezra echoed, staring ahead. Then, after a moment, he added, I hated you for a long time. Not just for what you did to her, but for never even trying. I wondered if I was just too inconvenient for your life, or if you looked at me and only saw your mistake. Zion stayed quiet. He didn't defend himself, didn't interrupt. He let the words pierce through. But over these past few weeks, Ezra continued, I've seen someone different than the man my mother described, someone who's not running anymore. Zion looked at him. It's all I have left, to be here. I can't rewrite the past, but I can show you who I am now. I'll stay, Ezra, as long as you'll let me. Ezra didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded, slightly worn letter. He held it out. My mother wrote this just before she passed, he said. It was never addressed to anyone, but I think it was meant for you. Zion took it gently, hands trembling. He opened it. Inside was the last voice of the woman he had once erased and who had somehow, even in absence, changed him. Zion unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The sunlight filtered through the palm fronds above the bench, casting warm patterns over the pages. As he read Lyanna's words, his breath caught. Zion, if you're reading this, then something unexpected, maybe even miraculous, has happened. Don't write this to accuse you. I write it so you'll know the truth. You hurt me deeply, but I also saw the man you could have been, the man who once looked up at the stars with me and whispered dreams neither of us thought we deserved. Our son is extraordinary. He is kind, brilliant, and unbreakable. I raised him to carry both the best of me and the best of you. I always hoped that somewhere deep in your soul, there was a space for him. If you have found that space, don't waste it. Lyanna Zion's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, silently, without shame. She believed in me, he whispered. Even after everything, she still believed I could be better. Ezra nodded slowly. That's why I'm giving you this chance. Not for you, for her. Zion reached out, placing his hand gently over Ezra's. Thank you. They sat together for a long time in the quiet garden, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow across the flowers Lyanna had once chosen herself. They didn't talk much more that day. There wasn't a need for more words. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fixed, but it was real. Over the following months, Zion kept his promise. He didn't try to buy forgiveness, he didn't use influence or connections, he simply showed up. He sat through long planning meetings at the foundation, taking notes, listening. He met with survivors and staff, not as a guest of honor, but as a learner. He helped clean up after events, shared meals in the break room, took late-night calls when Ezra needed advice, not about business, but about life. They began to speak of memories, of Molly, of Lyanna's laugh, of her fierce love. Ezra never pretended it didn't still hurt, but the wall between them began to soften, brick by brick. Zion never asked for anything in return, not his name on a wall, not a role in the foundation, not credit. He only ever asked to be allowed near, to try. One evening, as they walked through the garden again, Ezra stopped and turned to him. You know this doesn't end in a hug and happy tears, right? I know, Zion replied, smiling faintly. This isn't a movie. Ezra nodded. But it might be something better. Zion raised a brow. What's that? Ezra shrugged, his voice low. Real. They sat down on the same stone bench beneath the palm tree. Two men, father and son, not defined by perfection or bloodlines or easy resolution, but by the choice to begin again. And somewhere, in the breeze that danced through the leaves and the petals that swayed in the late sun, it felt like Lyanna was there, watching them finally become the family she had dreamed of all along.